Sawdust. That is what my hands have smelled like for 40 years. Sawdust and wood stain, and the particular roughness of a man who built things for a living. Most people look at hands like mine, and they think they know the whole story. Calloused palms, a thumbnail that never quite grows back. Right from a table saw incident in 1991. Knuckles that crack when the weather turns. They see a carpenter. They see a man who works with his body because he could not work with his mind. My daughter-in-law looked at my hands across her dinner table for 4 years and decided she understood everything she needed to understand about who I was and what I was worth. She was wrong about both, but I am getting ahead of myself. My name is Walter Grady. I am 67 years old. I live in a house I built with these hands on the side of a mountain in Black Mountain, North Carolina, 20 minutes east of Asheville, on a road that does not get much traffic and does not apologize for it. My wife Helen died 4 years ago. Ovarian cancer. Caught late, moved fast, and took from me, the only woman who ever looked at my hands and saw exactly what they were, which was not just a carpenter's hands, but the hands of a man who loved her and built her a life one board at a time. I buried Helen on a Tuesday in April, and I stood at her grave, and I looked at my hands and I thought, these hands built everything she touched, every wall she leaned against, every shelf she put her books on, every inch of the porch where she drank her morning coffee and watched the Blue Ridge turn colors in October. And now I have buried my son. Daniel was 41 years old. He was an architect in Asheville, a good one, the kind who understood that a building is not just a structure, but a promise to the people who will live inside it. He got that from me, though he would have said he got it from school. He went to bed on a Wednesday night in early October in his house on Kensington Road in the Biltmore Forest neighborhood of Asheville, and sometime before morning a cerebral aneurysm ruptured in his brain and took him without consultation, without warning, without the basic courtesy of a symptom. His wife Meredith found him Thursday morning. The paramedics told her it was a congenital defect, something in the architecture of his blood vessels that had been there since birth, and had simply, without negotiation, decided that Wednesday was enough. I want you to understand something about the way I received that phone call. I was in my workshop behind the house in Black Mountain at 6:47 in the morning, running my hand along a piece of red oak I had been shaping for a bookcase, when the phone rang. It was Meredith. Her voice had the particular flatness of a person who has already said the worst thing once, to the paramedics, to her mother, and is now repeating it with the mechanical efficiency of someone who has run out of ways to make it real. Walter, Daniel is gone. 3 words. I set down the piece of red oak. I did not pick it up again for 3 weeks, and when I did, I could not remember what the bookcase was for. I drove to Asheville Thursday morning, 40 minutes on Interstate 40 through the French Broad River Valley. The mountains doing their October thing, which is to say burning in slow motion with colors that should not exist outside of a painting. I did not see any of it. I was driving and I was thinking about my son, and I was holding the steering wheel with hands that had built his crib 37 years ago in the garage of our first house in Swannanoa, while Helen watched from a lawn chair and said, "Walter, the legs are uneven." And I said, "Helen, the legs are perfect." And she said, "Then why is it rocking?" And I adjusted the legs because she was right. She was always right about the things that mattered. The house on Kensington Road. I need to tell you about this house, because it matters to what comes later. It was a colonial revival in the Biltmore Forest neighborhood. 2 stories, brick facade, the kind of Asheville house that sits on a generous lot with old hardwoods and a circular driveway, and carries the quiet authority of money that has been there long enough to stop announcing itself. Daniel and Meredith had bought it 5 years ago. It was the kind of house that Meredith wanted, and that Daniel could almost afford. And I say almost because the down payment required more than what an architect with 12 years of experience and a good salary could assemble on his own. I had written Daniel a check for $85,000 on a Sunday afternoon at my kitchen table in Black Mountain. Helen's kitchen table, technically, the one she had picked out at an estate sale in Weaverville 6 months before the diagnosis. Daniel sat across from me and I wrote the check, and slid it across the wood surface. And he looked at it, and then he looked at me, and he said, "Dad." And I said, "It is not a loan. It is a gift. The house is right. And you need it. And I do not need this money the way you do." He asked me if I was sure. I told him I was sure. What I did not tell him, because it was not relevant to the moment, was exactly how sure I was. Exactly how much of what I had would make $85,000 look like what it actually was to me, which was a minor adjustment in a portfolio that Meredith Hale Grady, with her real estate management career and her Charlotte family and her particular way of looking at my hands across her dinner table, could not have imagined if she had tried. Daniel never told Meredith where the down payment came from. That was his choice. I did not ask him why. Fathers do not always need explanations. But here is the other thing. The thing that Meredith did not know, and Daniel did not tell her, and that sat quietly beneath that beautiful colonial revival house like a foundation nobody thought to inspect. The land, the 1.3 acres of Biltmore Forest real estate that the house sat on. I had bought that land in 1996 for $42,000, when Biltmore Forest was still developing its southern lots, and nobody was paying attention to a carpenter from Black Mountain writing checks at a county office. I had held that land for 23 years. When Daniel told me he wanted to buy in Biltmore Forest, I leased him the lot for $1 a year through a legal arrangement that Richard Covington, my attorney, had structured with the specific care of a man who understands that some gifts are better delivered quietly. Daniel knew about the land. Meredith did not. Daniel never told Meredith where the down payment came from. He never told her about the land either. That was his choice. Fathers do not always need explanations. And sons, I have learned, do not always need to explain the things they are quietly building to protect the people they love. I just did not know yet what Daniel had been building. The funeral was Friday, October 4th. It was a good funeral. In the way that funerals can be good, which is to say the right people were there and the wrong things were not said. And the whole machinery of collective grief operated with the kind of dignity that Daniel would have appreciated, because Daniel appreciated things that were well built, even ceremonies. The church was full. First Baptist on Charlotte Street, downtown Asheville, the kind of stone church that has been standing for 120 years and has held enough funerals to understand that its job is to provide walls and silence and let the humans do the rest. I sat in the front row in the same dark suit I had worn to Helen's funeral 4 years ago. It still fit. That is not a comfort. It is simply a fact about a man who has not changed size, because grief does not make you larger or smaller. It just makes you different in ways that do not show up on a tailor's tape. Kevin Marsh spoke. Kevin had been Daniel's closest friend at the architecture firm where Daniel had worked for 12 years. He was maybe 38, tall. The kind of man who wears a suit like he is borrowing it from someone more formal. And he spoke about Daniel with the specificity of a man who actually knew him. Not the public version, not the obituary version, the version that shows up at lunch on a Tuesday and says something that sticks with you. He talked about Daniel's attention to detail, the way Daniel would walk a job site 3 times before drawing a single line, because he said his father taught him to measure twice, and that once was for amateurs. The church laughed at that. The specific quiet laugh of people who are crying and grateful for permission to do something else with their faces for a moment. I looked down at my hands when Kevin said that. These hands, the ones that taught Daniel to measure, the ones that had built his crib with legs that Helen said were uneven, the ones that had hammered the framing for the front porch of our house in Black Mountain while Daniel sat on the sawdust pile at age 4 and watched with the total concentration of a child who is memorizing something he does not yet know he will need. These hands had held Helen's hand in the hospital room at Mission Hospital the night she died. Her hand had been so light by then. The cancer had taken the weight of her first, as if it were practicing. I had held her hand with these rough carpenter's hands, and she had looked at me and said, "Walter, your hands are warm." And those were not her last words, but they were the last words that mattered. I held myself together in that front pew with the same architecture I had used at Helen's funeral, which is to say barely, and only because falling apart in public felt like something Daniel would not have wanted from his father. Daniel had a particular respect for men who carried heavy things without announcing the weight. He got that from watching me. Or maybe I got it from watching him learn it. Fatherhood works in directions you do not expect. Meredith sat beside me in the front row. She was in black, appropriate, tailored, the kind of funeral outfit that costs money and communicates seriousness. She managed the service the way she managed most things, with the efficient authority of a woman who expresses control by solving logistics. The flowers were correct. The program was printed on heavy cardstock. The reception afterward was catered by a company whose name I did not recognize, but whose food arrived in containers that had a logo and a website printed on the side. Meredith had handled all of it in 3 days. I will give her that. She is capable. Capability was never the issue. The issue was the way she looked at me. Not at the funeral specifically. At dinners. At holidays. At the 4th of July barbecue on the Kensington Road patio 2 summers ago when I showed up in my truck with a cooler of beer and she looked at my hands, at the sawdust still under my fingernails, because I had come straight from the workshop and something moved across her face. Not disgust exactly. Something more precise than that. A categorization. The quick, involuntary sorting of a woman who has placed you in a box and sees no reason to check whether the box is accurate. I saw it. Daniel saw it too, though neither of us ever said anything about it. That is the kind of thing fathers and sons negotiate in silence. Judith Hale, Meredith's mother, had flown in from Charlotte the day after Daniel died. Judith was 63. A retired pharmaceutical sales manager with the particular energy of a woman who has spent her career in rooms where problems are identified and delegated. She had been managing the logistics of the past week with the efficient grief of someone who expresses love by organizing. The refrigerator was labeled. The sympathy cards were sorted by category. The guest list for the reception had been typed, printed, and annotated with dietary restrictions. Judith looked at me the way Meredith looked at me, and I understood where the box had been built. Caroline Webb was there too. Meredith's closest friend. 37. A marketing consultant who had driven up from Greenville, South Carolina. Caroline was quieter than Meredith. Observant in the way that certain women are observant, noticing things they do not comment on, and filing them in a place that is not quite memory and not quite judgment but somewhere in between. She had been on the couch at Kensington Road since Thursday evening, with her phone and a glass of wine that she refilled at intervals that suggested she was pacing herself for something longer than one evening. After the reception, we went back to the house on Kensington Road. The house smelled like flowers going past their prime, and the particular staleness of rooms where the windows have not been opened, because nobody has had the energy. Judith was in the kitchen wrapping food into containers with the systematic precision of a woman who believes that labeled leftovers are a form of emotional support. Caroline was on the couch again. I was in the hallway near the guest room where I had been staying since Thursday. My bag inside. My medication on the nightstand. My father's watch on the dresser. Beside a framed photograph of Daniel at age 5, holding a toy hammer and grinning at the camera with the unguarded joy of a child who believes that building things is the best possible use of a morning. I was planning to stay through the week. To help with whatever needed helping, to be present in whatever way presence was useful, and then to drive back to Black Mountain and begin the long private work of losing my son. That was my plan. Meredith had a different one. She came out of the master bedroom at 9:15. She had changed out of her funeral dress into jeans and a cream cashmere sweater. She looked tired in a way that went past tired, hollowed out, which is the right word for early grief when it sits in a person who is also making calculations. She also looked like someone who had made a decision. The particular set of her jaw, the way her eyes had stopped moving and settled on something fixed. She stopped in the hallway. Looked at me. Valta. I turned. She was standing 6 feet from me in the hallway of the house my money had helped buy on the land I still owned. And she was looking at me with the particular focus of a person who has rehearsed something and is now delivering it. Do you want tea? I said. I was about to make tea. I need you to pack your things. The hallway was very quiet. From the kitchen, the sound of Judith opening and closing containers. The soft click of lids being pressed into place. From the living room, the low glow of Caroline's phone screen reflected off her wine glass. Stacy. I caught myself. Meredith. I kept my voice level. Daniel's funeral was 6 hours ago. I know when it was. I was planning to stay through the week. To help. I do not need your help. Her voice was flat. Not hysterical. Not tearful. Flat and decided in the way that people sound when they have been working up to something for a while and have finally arrived at the saying of it. This is my house, Walter. I need you to leave. Tonight. My house, I thought. $85,000 and the deed to the 1.3 acres underneath it say otherwise. But fine. Can I ask why? Because I want to grieve in my own home without having to manage anyone else's presence. That was the stated reason. The cleanness of the phrasing, the way it was wrapped just diplomatically enough to be hard to argue with, told me it was not the whole reason. But I was 67 years old, and I had buried my son that morning, and I did not have the reserves for the argument underneath the argument. Some fights you walk away from not because you cannot win them, but because winning them tonight would cost more than they are worth, and the real reckoning is coming anyway on its own schedule. All right, I said. I packed my bag in 15 minutes. My medication. My laptop. My father's watch, which I travel with always, and which was sitting on the guest room dresser beside the framed photograph of Daniel at 5 years old, with the toy hammer. I picked up the photograph, Daniel's face in that picture. The grin. The total certainty that building things was the best possible use of a morning. I set it back down. It belongs in this house. Whatever else is true about this house and who owns what and whose money built what. That photograph belongs here because Daniel lived here and was happy here, and that matters more than real estate. I carried my bag to the front door. Meredith was in the kitchen now, talking to Judith in the low, controlled murmur of a woman who is informing her mother of a decision already made, rather than consulting her on one still pending. I could not hear the words. I did not need to. The tone was sufficient. Judith's silence in response was also sufficient. It had the quality of a woman who has opinions she is choosing to hold for a more strategic moment. Caroline was still on the couch. She looked up when I came through the living room with my bag. Her face did something. A brief, involuntary register of discomfort that moved across her features, the way a shadow moves across a wall, present and then gone, but you saw it. It told me she knew exactly what was happening and had thoughts about it that she was not going to share in this room at this hour, on this night. I nodded to her. She nodded back. That was the extent of our exchange. Sometimes a nod between two people contains more information than a conversation. I let myself out the front door of the Colonial Revival House on Kensington Road in the Biltmore Forest neighborhood of Asheville, North Carolina, on the night of my son's funeral, and I stood on the porch for a moment in the October dark. The porch had a rocking chair on it. Not a store-bought rocking chair. A rocking chair I had built in my workshop in Black Mountain and driven to Asheville in the bed of my truck as a housewarming gift. The first spring Daniel and Meredith were in the house. Red oak, mortise and tenon joints. No nails, no screws. Because I wanted it to hold together the way good things hold together. Through the precision of how the pieces fit. I had sat in that rocking chair the previous summer, August, a Saturday evening, with Daniel beside me in a lawn chair and 2 bottles of beer from Burial Beer Company that Daniel had picked up that afternoon because he said they had a new IPA and his old man needed to try something that was not Budweiser for once in his life. We sat on that porch for 2 hours. We talked about nothing important. Baseball. The Asheville tourists, and whether they would ever get a decent pitching rotation. The oak tree in his front yard that needed trimming. Whether I thought the workshop roof needed replacing this year or could wait another season. I told him it could wait. He said, "Dad, you always say it can wait, and then you fix it anyway because you cannot stand looking at something that is not right." And I said, "That is because I am a carpenter, and carpenters do not leave things unfinished." And he laughed. And the evening sat around us like something that knew it was good and did not need to announce it. 2 hours. I would spend the rest of my life being grateful for those 2 hours. You do not know, when you are living them, which ordinary moments are the ones you will carry in your chest forever. You only know later, and later is always too late to say the thing you should have said. Which is, I love you. And this porch. And this evening. And the sound of your laugh. And the beer is actually not bad. I looked at the rocking chair in the October dark. I put my hand on the armrest. Red oak, smooth from a season of use. The joints were still tight. All right, I thought. All right, Walter. Move. You have built things from nothing before. You have framed houses in the rain and hung drywall in August heat and replaced a roof the week after Helen's diagnosis because the roof would not wait, and grief does not excuse a leaking ceiling. You have carried weight your whole life. You can carry this. I picked up my bag. I walked to my truck in the driveway. I did not look back at the house. I did not need to. I knew every board in its frame, every nail in its walls, and I knew whose land it was standing on, and I knew that the woman who had just handed me my bag on the night of my son's funeral did not know any of those things, and was going to find out in a room she did not yet know existed on a day she had not yet scheduled. I started the engine. I pulled out of the circular driveway. The October night closed around the truck, and I drove toward Biltmore Avenue and the Hilton, and whatever comes after the worst evening of your adult life, when you have already survived what you thought was the worst evening 4 years ago. And it turns out there is no limit. There is always another room with another floor that drops out from under you. And the only thing you can do is what carpenters do, which is build something to stand on. The Hilton on Biltmore Avenue is the kind of hotel that exists in every mid-sized American city. Clean. Professional. The lobby smells like carpet cleaner, and the specific neutrality of a space that belongs to no one and therefore belongs to everyone. I checked in at 10:14 on the night of my son's funeral, with a bag that I had packed in 15 minutes and a suit that I had worn to 2 funerals now, and a pair of hands that smelled like red oak from the armrest of a rocking chair I had built for a porch I was no longer welcome on. Room 514. 5th floor. The window looked west toward the Blue Ridge, though at that hour the mountains were just a darker line against a dark sky, a suggestion of geography rather than a view. I sat on the edge of the bed with my coat still on and looked at the room. They are either a comfort or a void, depending entirely on what you carry through the door with you. I had carried grief and a bag and the memory of my daughter-in-law's voice saying, "This is my house," with the particular emphasis of a woman who had rehearsed the sentence before saying it. The room was a void. I called Ray Perkins. Ray answered on the second ring, which told me he had been waiting. Ray had been at the funeral. He had driven back to his house in Weaverville after the reception, and I knew, without either of us having discussed it, that he had been sitting in his kitchen with the phone close by because Ray Perkins has been my friend for 40 years, and he knows the difference between a night when I will call and a night when I will not, and this was the former. Walter, Ray. A pause. The particular pause of a man who can hear something in your voice and is giving you room to say it at your own speed. She asked me to leave. A longer pause. Not surprise exactly. Ray has known Meredith for 4 years and has never once said what he thinks of her directly, which in Ray Perkins' language is the most direct thing he could say. Tonight? Tonight. An hour ago. I am at the Hilton on Biltmore Avenue. Room 514. I have my things. I have my medication. I looked at the window. The dark line of the mountains. I just needed to tell someone. Come to my house. It is late, Ray. I do not care if it is late. Donna is up. Come to the house. I thought about it. Thought about the Hilton room, the void quality of it, the clean sheets that nobody had personal feelings about. Thought about Ray's house in Weaverville, which smelled like motor oil from the garage, where Ray still kept tools from his plumbing days, and Donna's cornbread, and the particular warmth of a house where two people have loved each other for 36 years, and it shows in the way the furniture is arranged, not for display, but for living. Tomorrow, I said. I will come tomorrow. Tonight, I just need to sit here. A pause. Are you actually fine? No, I said. But I am here. Which is enough for tonight. Call me if that changes. Any hour. I mean that. I know you do. We hung up. I took off my coat. I took off my shoes. I did not take off the funeral suit, because taking it off felt like it required a kind of energy I did not have. The energy of deciding what to put on next, of facing the overnight bag and choosing between the two shirts I had packed, and making a decision about something as ordinary as a shirt on a night when ordinary had been suspended. I lay on the Hilton bed and looked at the ceiling and thought about Daniel. Not about the funeral. Not about Meredith. About Daniel. About the specific, irreducible, uncategorizable fact of Daniel. Daniel, at 7 years old. This is the memory that came first, the way certain memories have priority access to your chest when your defenses are down. It was a Saturday morning in the Black Mountain house. I was building a bookcase for Helen in the workshop behind the house. Red oak again. Helen wanted it for the living room, for her collection of paperbacks that she organized by the color of their spines rather than by author, which drove me crazy, and which I never asked her to change because it made her happy. And a bookcase does not care how the books are organized. Daniel came into the workshop. 7 years old. Still in his pajamas. The ones with the rockets on them. He stood in the doorway and watched me work for 10 minutes without saying a word, which was unusual for Daniel at 7, who generally had commentary on everything. Then he said, "Dad, can I help?" I looked at him. 7 years old. Pajamas. With rockets. Bare feet on the workshop floor, which was covered in sawdust, and not appropriate for bare feet. But I was not going to start that argument, because the look on his face was the look of a boy who needed to be included in something his father was doing. "Come here," I said. I gave him a hammer. Not a toy hammer. A real hammer, the small finishing hammer I used for trim work. It was still too heavy for him, but it was the lightest real tool I had. I positioned a nail and a piece of scrap oak. I put his hands on the hammer, adjusted his grip. "Hold it here, son. Let the weight do the work. Do not force it. The hammer knows what it is doing. Your job is to guide it." He swung. Missed the nail. Hit the wood. I did not say anything. He swung again. Missed again. The third time, the hammer caught the nail head and drove it a 1/4 inch into the oak, and Daniel looked up at me with a face that I will carry in my chest until the day I die, the face of a boy who has just discovered that he can make a mark on something solid. "I did it," he said. "You did it," I said. He drove that nail the rest of the way in. 4 more swings, each one a little more confident than the last. And when it was flush with the wood surface, he ran his finger over the nail head and said, "It is smooth, Dad." I said, "That is what happens when you do it right." And he looked at his hand, at the small hand that had just held a real hammer for the first time, and he said, "My hands smell like yours now. My hands smell like yours now." I lay on the Hilton bed at 2 in the morning looking at the ceiling with that sentence in my ears, and I let it sit there because some sentences do not need you to do anything with them. They just need you to hold still while they do their work. Sleep came sometime after that. I do not remember the exact moment. It came the way sleep comes to men who have carried too much for too long. Not as rest, but as a temporary ceasing of the weight. A pause in the holding. A brief permission to set things down. I woke at 6:20 on Saturday morning. The Blue Ridge was visible now through the window. Gray-blue in the early October light. The mountains doing their patient eternal thing. I looked at them for a moment. Then I looked at my hands. Then I reached for the phone. Time to call Richard Covington. Not because I needed a lawyer yet. But because I have spent 30 years reading terrain before walking into it, and whatever Meredith Hale Grady was building on her side of this, I intended to know the ground before she finished drawing her plans. I called Richard Covington at 9 o'clock on Saturday morning from the Hilton room. I had showered, changed into the one clean shirt I had packed, and eaten nothing, because the hotel breakfast buffet required going downstairs and sitting among people who were having normal Saturdays, and I was not ready to be in a room where normalcy was the prevailing condition. Richard answered on the first ring. He has been my personal attorney for 24 years. He is 69 years old. His office is on the second floor of a brick building on Pack Square in downtown Asheville, the kind of building that was built in 1922 by people who understood that brick lasts and that the cost of doing something right the first time is always less than the cost of fixing it later. Richard has the same philosophy. He is methodical. He is thorough. He has the specific quality of a man who has heard most categories of human behavior and is no longer capable of being shocked by any of them, only occasionally disappointed. Walter. His voice was warm, the warmth of a man who had sent flowers to the funeral and had known better than to approach me at the reception, because Richard Covington understands the difference between presence and intrusion. How are you holding up? I am okay, Richard. I need to ask you something. Of course. Meredith asked me to leave the house last night. The night of the funeral. A silence. Not a short one. The particular silence of a man who has just heard something that recalibrates several assumptions simultaneously. Last night? Yes. 9:15. She told me to pack my things and leave. She said it was her house. Another pause. I could hear Richard processing, not the emotional content. He would get to that later. In the way that attorneys process emotional content, which is to acknowledge it once and then set it aside in favor of the structural question. The structural question, in this case, was about position. Walter, I am not calling about that specifically. I want to make sure I understand, legally, before whatever comes next. That is why I am calling. Good. Nathan's estate. He paused. Daniel's estate. Do you know anything about his will? Not the specifics. That would be Daniel's estate attorney. Do you know who handled it? Thomas Whitfield. Daniel mentioned him once, maybe twice. He is downtown, on Patton Avenue. I know Thomas. He is solid, thorough, the kind of man who reads a document exactly as written and does not editorialize. A pause. Then Richard said something that changed the temperature of the conversation. Walter, whatever Daniel's will says, and whatever Meredith's intentions are, I want you to know that your position is substantially stronger than she could possibly imagine. I know, I said. You know, Richard, I have been quietly managing my own affairs for 30 years. I bought my first rental property in 1993. A duplex on Haywood Road in West Asheville, for $68,000 cash while I was still framing houses 6 days a week. I know exactly what I have and where it is. A pause. The kind of pause that told me Richard was recalculating not the legal situation, but his understanding of the conversation he was in. He had known about my portfolio in general terms. He had structured the land lease for Daniel. He had reviewed my investment accounts. But hearing me say it in this context, on this morning, with this particular steadiness in my voice, was different. Does Meredith know? I thought about that. About the way Meredith had said, "This is my house." About the flatness in her voice. About the way she had looked at my hands across her dinner table for 4 years and seen what she expected to see, and never once considered that she might be looking at the wrong thing. Meredith sees a carpenter with rough hands, I said. That is all she has ever seen. She decided what I was worth the first time she looked at my hands across her dinner table, and she never updated the estimate. Richard was quiet for a moment. I could picture him in his home office in Montford, the old Asheville neighborhood where he and his wife had lived for 30 years, surrounded by the accumulated paper of a man who has been practicing law since before computers made filing convenient. Thinking. Assembling. Then let's make sure the update arrives in the right setting, he said. I appreciated the phrasing. It was precise. It did not overcommit. It acknowledged that something was coming without presuming to know exactly what shape it would take. That is the mark of a good attorney, and also the mark of a man who has known you long enough to understand that you do not need reassurance. You need information. There was something else, Richard said. Something I should tell you. Go ahead. I received a call from Thomas Whitfield's office this morning. Before I called you. His assistant mentioned that another party had already inquired about accelerating the timeline for the will reading. Meredith, I said. Richard did not confirm or deny. He did not need to. The timing spoke for itself. Friday night, the night of the funeral, Meredith throws me out of the house. Saturday morning, before I have finished processing the previous 12 hours, she is already on the phone with the estate attorney asking about accelerating probate. I did not know it yet. Not in confirmed detail. But I would learn later that Meredith had spent Friday night on the phone with Judith, her mother, in Charlotte, running numbers she did not fully understand. The house, the joint accounts, Daniel's investment portfolio, his life insurance. They had assembled an inventory of what they believed Daniel's estate contained and had arrived at a figure that satisfied them. They had a plan. The plan involved the assets they could see and the timeline they could control, and the assumption, unstated but foundational, that the old carpenter from Black Mountain was a minor variable in an equation they had already solved. They had accounted for everything. The house, the accounts, the insurance, the furniture, the cars. They had accounted for everything except the final section of a document they had not read, written by a man they had underestimated, about a father they had never understood. She just did not know about the final section. I moved to Ray Perkins' house in Weaverville on Saturday afternoon. Weaverville is 15 minutes north of Asheville on a road that follows the French Broad River and then turns up into the foothills where the houses get smaller and the lots get bigger, and the people who live there have opinions about property taxes and the proper way to stack firewood but keep both to themselves unless asked. Ray and Donna have been on Reams Creek Road for 27 years, in a house that Ray built most of himself with help from me on the framing and the roof, which means I know exactly how that house is constructed. Every joist, every header, every piece of blocking behind the drywall, and there is a comfort in that, in being inside a structure whose bones you personally set. Donna Perkins met me at the door. Donna is 64, a retired nurse from Mission Hospital, the same hospital where Helen died, though Donna worked in pediatrics and Helen's floor was oncology, and the building is large enough that these two facts exist without collision. Donna has the practical warmth of a woman who spent 31 years in rooms where things were serious and has learned that the most useful response to most situations is not a speech but a specific action. She took my bag from my hand before I could set it down. She said, "The guest room is ready." She said, "There is pot roast." She did not say, "I am sorry about what happened at Meredith's house," because Donna Perkins does not deal in commentary. She deals in pot roast and clean sheets and the quiet insistence that you will eat something whether you believe you are hungry or not. The guest room smelled like Donna's lavender sachets and clean cotton. The bed had a quilt that Donna's mother had made in 1978. A pattern of blue and white squares that was faded in the way that loved things are faded. Not from neglect, but from use. I set my bag down. I put my father's watch on the nightstand. I stood for a moment in the room and breathed. And for the first time since Thursday morning, when the phone rang in my workshop, I felt something under my feet that was not falling. That evening, I sat in Ray's living room with coffee. Ray sat across from me in the brown leather recliner that Donna had tried to replace 3 times, and that Ray had refused to surrender on grounds that a man is entitled to one ugly chair in his own house. The living room smelled like motor oil, faintly, from the garage through the wall, where Ray still kept his plumbing tools, and an engine block from a 1972 Chevy truck that he had been rebuilding for 11 years, and would never finish because the rebuilding was the point, not the truck. It also smelled like pot roast and the particular cedar warmth of a house that has a wood stove and uses it. I told him everything. Not the legal details, those were Richard's territory, but the shape of it. The hallway. Meredith's face. The flatness of her voice. The way she had said "this is my house," as if ownership were a sentence she had practiced. The packed bag. The porch. The rocking chair in the dark. The October night. And the drive to the Hilton. Ray listened the way he always listens. Without interruption. Without the anxious, helpful suggestions that people offer when they cannot tolerate silence and need to fill it with their own competence. Ray has the specific gift of a man who understands that sometimes the most useful thing another person can do is nothing at all except be in the room while you say the thing you need to say. He sat in his ugly recliner with his coffee, and he looked at me, and he let me talk until I was finished talking. When I was done, he was quiet for a moment. The house ticked. The wood stove made its settling sounds. Outside, the October night was doing what October nights do in the North Carolina foothills. Cooling steadily toward frost. The kind of cold that is not hostile but firm. The weather's way of telling you that summer's account has been closed and the terms of the new season are non-negotiable. "What are you going to do?" he asked. "Wait," I said. "Thomas Whitfield's office will schedule the will reading. I will be there. Richard will be there." I picked up my coffee, and then I will let the process do what the process does. "You are not worried." "About what?" "About what Daniel left her versus what he left you. About what Meredith thinks she is walking into versus what she is actually walking into." I looked at my oldest friend across his living room. 67 years old. Tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. Missing my son in a way that was going to be the work of years, the kind of work that does not have a completion date or a final inspection, just an ongoing daily practice of carrying something you cannot set down. And quietly, beneath all of that, completely certain about the one thing that Meredith Hale Grady had decided she already understood. "No," I said. "I am not worried about that." Ray looked at me for a moment. Then he nodded. Slowly. The nod of a man who has known you for 40 years and can tell the difference between confidence and bluff and knows which one he is looking at. "Okay," he said. "More coffee?" "Please." Donna appeared with the pot before I finished the word. She refilled both cups, set the pot on a trivet that had a rooster painted on it that had been a wedding gift from her aunt, and returned to the kitchen without comment. The trivet had a chip on one corner. Everything in Ray and Donna's house had a chip on one corner, or a stain on one edge, or a scratch that told you it had been used by people who were living rather than people who were displaying. Helen's house had been the same way. I missed that. I missed living in a house where the objects told stories about the people who touched them. The days between the funeral and the will reading had a texture I can only describe as suspended. Not peaceful. Nothing about that week was peaceful, but suspended. The way things are when you are waiting for a process to complete, and there is nothing productive to do in the interim except exist, and let the existing do whatever the existing is going to do to you. I existed at Ray and Donna's house in Weaverville. Donna fed me. She fed me with the systematic determination of a woman who has decided that nutrition is her contribution to the crisis, and she will fulfill that contribution 3 times a day, regardless of what my appetite has to say about it. Pot roast became chicken, and dumplings became a beef stew that simmered all day Tuesday and filled the house with a smell that was so close to comfort it almost hurt. Ray and I watched college football. It was October, which meant the season was in full swing. And Ray is a Clemson man from his roots in upstate South Carolina, and I am an NC State man because Helen went there, and loyalty to a woman extends to her football team whether you care about football or not. We watched the games. We commented on the plays. We occupied the specific space that men occupy when they are together, and something heavy is happening, and they need a screen to look at when looking at each other becomes too much information for the room. I took walks in the mornings. Weaverville is good for walking if you do not need the walking to take you anywhere in particular and are content with roads that curve and hills that rise without announcing what is on the other side. I walked in the October mornings in the specific mountain drizzle that western North Carolina does not apologize for, the kind of rain that is not quite rain but more a general suggestion of moisture that settles on your jacket and your hair and your hands without committing to being an actual weather event. The Blue Ridge sat in the distance doing its ancient patient thing. The trees along Reams Creek Road were turning, the maples going orange and the oaks going the particular rust gold that oak trees go when they have decided it is time, but are not in any hurry about it. Oaks do not rush. I have always respected that about oak trees. They are the carpenters of the forest. Slow, structural, building for the long term. I thought about Daniel on those walks. I thought about him constantly, not always in grief, sometimes in the involuntary memory way, where you are doing something ordinary, stepping over a puddle or noticing a mailbox, or watching a hawk ride a thermal above the ridge, and your son is suddenly there in full detail, not as an absence but as a presence so specific you can hear his voice. Daniel at 12 years old. This was a Saturday in May. Carl Renfro, our neighbor in Black Mountain, had a roof leak above his bedroom. Carl was 73 at the time and not climbing ladders anymore, and the quote he had gotten from a roofing company was more than he could afford on his pension. I told Carl I would fix it. I did not charge Carl because Carl had watched Daniel after school for 2 years when Helen was doing the bookkeeping for Dr. Peroni's dental office and I was framing houses in Swannanoa, and we needed someone to make sure our son did not burn the house down between 3:30 and 5:45. Debts like that do not have invoices. They have reciprocity. Daniel asked to come. I said yes. I put him in a harness. I handed him up the shingles. And before we started, I crouched on Carl's roof with my son and I said, "Before you step on anything up here, you test it first. You do not trust what you cannot see. You put your weight on it slowly, and you let the structure tell you whether it will hold." Daniel nodded with the seriousness of a 12-year-old who has been given a rule by his father and understands that the rule is not about the roof. We fixed Carl's roof in 4 hours. Daniel handed up every shingle, without dropping one. On the drive home, he did not say anything for 10 minutes, which was unusual for Daniel at 12, and then he said, "Dad, how do you know which boards are rotten just by stepping on them?" And I said, "You do not always know, but you learn to feel the difference between solid and pretending to be solid." He was quiet again. Then he said, "Is that true for people too?" I looked at my 12-year-old son in the passenger seat of my truck on the road back to Black Mountain, and I thought, this boy is going to see things that other people miss, and I was right. Daniel at 22 years old. This was a phone call. It was 11:45 at night, and I was in bed, and the phone rang, and Helen, who was still alive and still organized the nightstand, so that the phone was on her side, because she did not trust me to answer it without knocking something over, picked up and said, "It is Daniel," and handed me the phone with the expression of a woman who was already smiling because she could hear his voice through the receiver. "Dad, they hired me. They actually hired me. I start Monday. Morrison and Kale Architects. The firm he had been interviewing with for 3 weeks. The firm he wanted more than any other because they did residential work with an emphasis on craftsman-style homes, and Daniel said their philosophy was that a house should be built like the family who lives in it designed it, even when the family does not know what they want yet. I said, "Congratulations." Helen took the phone back from me and talked to him for 45 minutes. I lay in the dark and listened to her side of the conversation, and I could hear Daniel's voice through the phone, excited, young, 22 years old and believing in the world, and I thought, he is going to be fine. He is going to build good things. Daniel at 36 years old. This was the memory that hurt the most because it was the closest and therefore the most detailed and the most real. It was a Sunday in October, 2 years before he died. I had driven to Black Mountain from Asheville, which is the wrong direction, but Daniel did that sometimes. Drove to the old house to sit on the porch, because he said the porch at Black Mountain had a different quality of quiet than the porch on Kensington Road. He was right about that. The Black Mountain porch looks at mountains. The Kensington Road porch looks at a neighborhood. We sat on the porch with coffee. Not beer this time. Morning. The Blue Ridge was doing its October show, the color palette that looks like God hired a painter and then gave the painter a budget that had no ceiling. Daniel was quiet for a long time. Not the troubled quiet. The full quiet. The quiet of a man who is sitting exactly where he wants to be, with exactly the person he wants to be with. Then he said, "Dad, everything I build, I learned from watching your hands." I did not say anything. I did not know what to say. There are statements that arrive from your children that are so precisely aimed at the center of who you are that language cannot meet them. You just sit with them. You let them land. You hold your coffee and you look at the mountains and you let your son's words do what they came to do, which is to tell you that you mattered in the way you most hoped to matter. Everything I build, I learned from watching your hands. I thought about that sentence every morning on those Weaverville walks. I looked at my hands while I walked and I thought about Daniel looking at them across 36 years and learning from them, and I thought, he was happy. Whatever else is true about what happened and what comes next, he was happy. He built good things with good people, and he sat on porches and drank coffee and called his father when decisions were big. He was happy. That matters. That is the thing that matters. On Wednesday, October 9th, the phone rang at Ray's house. It was Thomas Whitfield's office. The will reading was scheduled for Friday, October 11th, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, at his office on Patton Avenue, downtown Asheville. I called Richard. Confirmed. I called Thomas Whitfield's office back. Confirmed my attendance. I did not call Meredith. She had not called me. The process was about to deliver what the process was designed to deliver. Thursday, October 10th. Ray drove me to Richard Covington's office on Pack Square in the morning. Not because I needed the company. I am 67 years old and fully capable of driving myself to my attorney's office in a city I have known for 40 years. But because Ray Perkins is the kind of friend who puts on a clean shirt and picks up his keys and says, "I will drive," in a tone that is not a question, and you understand that arguing with it would require more energy than accepting it, and the energy is better spent elsewhere. We drove from Weaverville into Asheville on the winding road that follows Reams Creek down to the river, then south along the French Broad into the city. The morning was gray and mild, the particular October gray that western North Carolina does when it is between rains, not gloomy but soft. The sky, the color of unbleached cotton. Ray did not talk during the drive. He had the radio on low, a country station that neither of us was listening to. He parked on the street near Pack Square and said, "I will be at the coffee shop on the corner. Take your time." Richard's office is on the second floor of the brick building I mentioned before, the one from 1922. The stairs creak in a specific place on the 7th step that I have noticed every time I have climbed them for 24 years. The office itself has exposed brick and high windows that let in the Pack Square morning light and the accumulated paper of a man who has been practicing law since the Carter administration. There are files in Richard Covington's office that predate the internet, predate email, predate the software that was supposed to make filing systematic. Richard keeps them because Richard does not discard what might be needed, a philosophy that applies to both his legal practice and his friendship. Richard was behind his desk. My file was in front of him. My actual file. The one he has been maintaining for 24 years, which is substantial enough that it has its own dedicated drawer in his cabinet, which I know because I saw it once when he was looking for a document and the drawer required both hands to open. "How are you doing, Walter?" he asked first. Because Richard Covington is old-fashioned enough to ask the human question before the legal one, and because he knows that the human question is the legal question most of the time. "I am okay. I am ready for tomorrow." "Good." He opened the file. He put on his reading glasses, the half-moon kind that sit on the end of his nose and make him look like a man from a different century, which in some ways he is. Let me walk you through where you stand so there are no surprises on your end. There will not be. Umormi. He looked down at the file. Your personal real estate portfolio. 14 properties acquired between 1993 and 2017. Residential rentals, primarily. 3 in West Asheville on Haywood Road and the surrounding streets. 4 in Montford. 2 in Woodfin. 3 in Black Mountain. 2 in Weaverville. Total current market value, based on the most recent assessments, approximately $7,200,000. That is right, I said. The Black Mountain residence, which you built yourself and own outright. Current market value approximately $280,000. Though we both know the land value is moving upward, given the development pressure in the area. Yes. Your personal investment accounts, managed through Vanguard and consolidated 3 years ago. Total value, as of the end of last quarter, approximately $2,100,000. Yes. The construction equipment leasing operation. 4 pieces of heavy equipment that you lease to contractors in the Asheville area. Current value of the equipment approximately $850,000. Annual lease income approximately $110,000. Yes. Your savings and liquid accounts. Approximately $620,000. Richard took off his glasses. He looked at me across the desk, across 24 years of legal counsel and the particular trust that accumulates between 2 men who have handled serious things together and handled them well. Total estimated net worth, Walter. Approximately $11,050,000. I looked at him. I know the numbers, Richard. I have always known the numbers. I have been acquiring property in this county since 1993. Every purchase was made with cash from carpentry work and rental income. No inheritance, no lottery, no silent partner. Just a man who understood that land is the one thing they do not make more of. And that a carpenter who pays attention to what is being built around him can see where the value is going before the developers arrive. Richard was quiet for a moment. The packed square morning came through the high windows, the soft October light falling on the brick and the paper and the file that contained the documented proof that the man across the desk was not what he appeared to be to anyone who stopped looking at the surface. Does Meredith know the numbers? Meredith knows Daniel was an architect who worked for a good firm and had a father who was a carpenter in Black Mountain. I paused. I do not believe she knows the specifics. Daniel did not talk about my finances. That was between me and Daniel. It was private. And the land, Richard said. The Kensington Road lot. She does not know about that either. She does not. Another pause. Walter, what do you expect her to say tomorrow? I thought about the hallway on Kensington Road. The flatness. This is my house. The blazer she would wear tomorrow. Business clothes, proceeding clothes. The woman who was coming into that conference room with the ending already written. I expect her to believe she is coming out of tomorrow in a strong position and that I am coming out of it in a weak one, I said. I expect her to have decided that my relevance to the proceedings is minimal. And the reality? The reality is that Thomas Whitfield is a thorough man who follows the document exactly as written. And Daniel's document has a final section. I looked at Richard directly. Daniel called me 6 months ago. He told me he had updated his will. He told me what the final section said. He wanted me to know. A pause. The office was very still. He said, Dad, I want to make sure nobody ever looks at your hands and thinks they know your whole story. I stopped. The sentence sat in the room. It sat in the brick, and the paper, and the October light. And it sat in my chest, where it had been sitting for 6 months, growing heavier with each day since Daniel died, because the man who said it was no longer alive to say it again. He knew, I said. He saw things I did not see clearly. Daniel was perceptive. He always was. He could look at a roof and find the rotten board. He could look at a person and find the truth they were hiding. He looked at Meredith and he saw something, and he built a wall around me in a legal document 6 months before he died. Richard looked at me for a long moment. Then he closed the file. I will be in that room tomorrow. Anything that needs a response, legal, practical, anything. I am there. I know. Thank you, Richard. I stood to go. Richard stood too, which he does not always do, and extended his hand. I took it. His hand was soft, in the way that attorneys' hands are soft. Mine was rough in the way that carpenters' hands are rough. Two different kinds of hands that had been working together for 24 years, toward this particular Friday afternoon. Daniel was a good man, Walter. The best of what we hope for. Yes, I said. He was. Friday morning, October 11th. I did not sleep well. Not because of anxiety about the reading. I have been in rooms where documents determine outcomes before, and anxiety about process is wasted energy when you already know what the process contains. I did not sleep well because of Daniel. Because the night before the will reading is also, unavoidably, still the week after the funeral. And grief does not pause for legal proceedings. It does not check your calendar. It does not say, you have an important meeting tomorrow, so I will let you rest. Grief operates on its own schedule, which is no schedule at all, which is the schedule of 3 in the morning when your son is dead, and the ceiling above you is just a ceiling, and not the underside of anything that matters. I lay in Ray's guest room under Donna's mother's quilt and thought about Daniel. Not memories this time, not specific moments, just the shape of him, the space he had occupied in the world that was now a space without him in it. 41 years of a person, and then an empty room in your chest where the person used to stand, and no amount of legal documents or real estate holdings can build a wall around that room, because it is not the kind of room that has walls. It is the kind of room that has weather, and the weather at 3 in the morning was heavy and low and not moving. I got up at 5:30. Donna's kitchen. The linoleum floor was cold under my feet, in the way that linoleum is cold in October in a house that heats with a wood stove banked since 11. I made coffee. Donna keeps her coffee in a canister with a hand-painted label that says, coffee in a script that is either her handwriting or her mother's. I have never asked which. What matters is that the coffee is strong and the window above the sink looks east toward the ridge. I stood at that window and watched Weaverville come into the morning. The yards with fall colors deepening, the particular gray-blue light of western North Carolina before the sun commits to the day, when everything looks like a photograph that has not been developed yet. A dog barked somewhere up Reams Creek Road. The ordinary sounds of an ordinary Friday, and I was standing in my friend's kitchen holding coffee with hands that smelled like soap instead of sawdust because I had not been in my workshop in 2 weeks. The longest I had gone without touching wood since I was 19 years old. Daniel. I thought. I am going to be okay. Your old man has been okay for a long time. That is what carpenters do. We do not leave things unfinished. Ray found me at 6:30. He did not say good morning. He poured himself coffee and stood beside me at the window and said nothing for 4 full minutes, which is exactly the right amount of nothing when someone you love is standing in your kitchen on the morning of the hardest day of the current portion of their life. You want breakfast? Donna is going to make it whether I want it or not. That is correct. Donna appeared at 6:45 with the efficiency of a woman who has been a morning person for 64 years. She did not ask what we wanted. She made biscuits and gravy. The real kind. Biscuits from scratch, cut with a glass because Donna does not own a biscuit cutter and has never needed one. Gravy with sausage from the Weaverville Farmers Market, from a man named Dale who raises his own hogs. The biscuits were hot. The gravy was thick. The kitchen smelled like butter and sage and the particular warmth of a meal made because someone could not fix the thing that was actually wrong, and this was the next best thing. I ate more than I expected. Donna watched with the satisfied expression of a woman whose theory about nutrition as crisis management was being validated. I stood from the table, put on my jacket. Ray was already in the truck. Donna stood at the kitchen door and said, "Walter." I turned. She looked at me with the steadiness of a retired nurse who has seen people walk into hard rooms. "You are going to be fine in there." Then she closed the door because Donna Perkins does not do extended goodbyes. She does biscuits and a sentence and a closed door, and the confidence that both were enough. Ray drove Weaverville to Asheville, the familiar road, the French Broad River on the left, the mountains holding their positions. I watched my hands on my knees. 40 years of sawdust. 40 years of building things from raw material into finished structures. These hands built houses. They built a crib and a porch and a rocking chair and a bookcase and a life. They signed checks and held a dying woman's hand and taught a boy how to drive a nail. And now they were going to sit folded on a conference table while a lawyer read what that boy, now a man, now gone, had built for me in a document I had not asked for and did not know I needed until the night my daughter-in-law said, "This is my house." Ray parked on a side street off Patton Avenue. He had offered to come in. I told him this was a room for attorneys and family. He nodded the way he nods, completely, without argument. Thomas Whitfield's office was on the 3rd floor. Dark carpet, a reception area that smelled like new furniture and printer toner. The conference room at the end of the hall. A table that seated 8. A window looking out at Patton Avenue. Downtown Asheville doing its Friday afternoon thing. Richard was already there. He stood, shook my hand, the soft hand and the rough hand, and nodded once. The nod that said, "I am here. The document is the document, and we are going to let it do its work." I sat on the left side of the conference table. Richard beside me. I looked at the empty chairs across the table. I looked at the window. I looked at my hands, folded on the dark wood surface. All right, I thought. Let us see what my son built. The door opened at 2:01. Meredith came in first. She was wearing a navy blazer and dark slacks. Business clothes. Not funeral clothes. The clothes of a woman who is attending a proceeding, not a ceremony. Her hair was pulled back. Her face was composed in the particular way that faces are composed when the person behind them has spent the morning preparing to be observed and has decided exactly what the observation should find. Judith followed. Gray pantsuit, reading glasses on a chain around her neck. A small leather notepad in her left hand. She sat 2 chairs from Meredith with the deliberate spacing of a woman who is here in a support capacity and wants the geography of the seating to reflect that. Caroline came last. She sat on Judith's other side, the furthest from the head of the table, and folded her hands in front of her with the posture of someone who understands that her role in this room is witness, not participant. Meredith looked at me when she sat down. One look. Quick. Assessing. The look of someone checking a variable they have already accounted for. An old carpenter in a sport coat that was clean but not expensive, sitting beside an attorney she did not recognize. She categorized what she saw in the time it takes to blink. And then she turned to Thomas Whitfield and gave him the look that said, "We can begin." I looked at her for a moment longer than she looked at me. She has already decided, I thought. She came into this room with the ending already written. She is here for the official reading of something she believes she already knows. She sat in that chair the way she sat at her dinner table when I came to holiday meals, with the settled certainty of a woman who understands the landscape and her position in it. She was certain about the house, certain about the accounts, certain about the insurance, certain about the old man across the table with the rough hands and the truck and the workshop in Black Mountain. She was certain about everything, except the one thing that mattered. Thomas Whitfield sat at the head of the table. He was 62, trim, silver-haired, with the measured composure of a man who has presided over many of these rooms and understands that his job is to read the document, answer questions, and not contribute to whatever emotional weather is already in the space. He had a glass of water. He had the will. He had the particular stillness of an attorney who knows what is in the document he is about to read and has already decided that his face will give away nothing. He cleared his throat softly. The room went quiet. "Thank you all for being here," he said. "We are here today for the reading of the last will and testament of Daniel Allen Grady. I will read the document as written and address any questions after the complete reading. Please Please hold questions until I have finished. He began. Daniel's estate, as Thomas read it, was structured clearly. The house on Kensington Road, which had no remaining mortgage. I noted that detail because Meredith's posture shifted slightly when Thomas said no remaining mortgage, a small settling, the physical equivalent of a checkmark on a list. The house went to Meredith outright. The joint checking and savings accounts, approximately $72,000. To Meredith. Daniel's personal investment account, held separately, approximately $145,000. To Meredith. The life insurance policy, $500,000, with Meredith as named beneficiary. Thomas noted this was handled separately from the will itself, but included it for completeness. Meredith's posture across the table was changing with each item. Relaxing. Settling. The incremental physical release of a person who is hearing what they expected to hear, in the order they expected to hear it, at the values they had estimated. Her shoulders dropped a quarter inch. Her hands, which had been clasped on the table, separated and rested flat on the surface. Judith was making small marks on her notepad with a mechanical pencil. Methodical. Precise. The marks of a woman who is tracking numbers she has already projected and confirming that the projections were accurate. Caroline was watching the table. Not the people. The table. As if the wood surface were the safest place to put her eyes, while the room did what the room was doing. Richard beside me was still. The professional stillness of a man who is listening and waiting, and knows that the portion of the document that has been read so far is the overture and not the symphony. I sat with my hands folded. I watched Meredith settle. I watched the certainty solidify in her posture, in the flatness of her palms on the table, in the way she had stopped looking at Thomas and was now looking at a point slightly above his head, the look of a person who no longer needs to pay close attention because the information is confirming what they already believed. If you have been listening for a while and you want stories like this to keep coming, hit that like button and subscribe. 97% of people watching never do, but it is what keeps this whole thing running. So thank you. Sincerely. Now, back to that conference room on Patton Avenue. Thomas finished reading the insurance notation. He turned the page. There was a pause. Not a long one. The particular pause of a man who is turning a page in a document and knows that the page he is turning to is different in kind from the pages that preceded it. He looked up. Briefly. Not at anyone specifically. Then, he looked back down at the document. There is one final section, he said. Meredith looked up from the table. Something in Thomas's tone, precise, neutral, but carrying the specific weight of a man who knows that the next paragraph is going to change the pressure of the room, had landed. Her hands, which had been resting flat on the table in the settled confidence of a woman who believed the proceedings were essentially concluded, moved slightly. Not much. A repositioning. The way a person shifts their weight when something in the air changes and the body registers it before the mind has language for it. Thomas straightened the page. He read, "The following provisions relate to my father, Walter Allen Grady. It is my specific wish that the following be stated on the record and in the presence of all parties. My father has, throughout my life, conducted himself with a financial discipline and generosity that he has never once asked acknowledgement for. The following is an accounting of certain facts that I believe all parties should be aware of, and which I have asked my attorney to present in this reading in the event that my father's position is ever misrepresented or misunderstood." The room was different now. Not quieter. It had already been quiet. But the quality of the quiet had changed. The way a room changes when the air pressure shifts and everyone in it can feel it even though no one has moved. Meredith's eyes were on Thomas, fixed. The settling from the previous minutes was gone. Her body had re-engaged with the proceedings in the particular way that bodies re-engage when the information has deviated from the expected script. Thomas continued. The down payment on the property at Kensington Road in the Biltmore Forest neighborhood of Asheville, North Carolina, in the amount of $85,000, was a personal gift from my father Walter Grady. Provided in March of 2019. This was not a loan. The gift was made without condition and without expectation of acknowledgement. My father has never sought or received any legal interest in this property. As a result of this gift, though his contribution to its acquisition is a matter I wish to formally document. Meredith's hands moved. One of them went to her lap. The other gripped the edge of the table. Not tightly. Not yet. But the fingers had curled around the wood in the way that fingers curl when they are looking for something solid to hold while the ground shifts. Judith's mechanical pencil had stopped. It was hovering above the notepad at a slight angle, frozen in the specific posture of a hand that was in the middle of writing something, and stopped because the information arriving was not the information it had been prepared to record. Thomas turned the page. Furthermore, I wish to document the following. In the first year of my career as an architect, I undertook an independent residential project that required capital beyond what I had available. My father provided $200,000 to fund this project, including contractor fees, materials, and site preparation. This investment was made privately, through my personal accounts, and was not disclosed to any other party. The project was completed successfully, and became the foundation of my professional reputation. I document this here because it has been represented by others as a self-made achievement. And while I am proud of the work, the truth is that it was made possible by my father's belief in me and his willingness to invest in that belief without requiring credit. The color in Meredith's face had changed. Not red, not flushed. The opposite. The blood was leaving. The particular draining that happens when the body redirects its resources from the surface to the core, because the core is where the emergency is. Her jaw, which had been set in the composed line she had walked in with, had loosened. Not slack, but no longer held. The architecture of her composure was showing its first structural cracks. I watched her. I did not want to watch her. I would have preferred to close my eyes and simply listen to my son's words being read aloud by a man who had never met him, and hear in those words the careful, thorough, precise voice of a boy who had learned to measure twice, and who had measured this document more carefully than anything he had ever built. But I watched her, because this was the part that mattered. Not the money. The seeing. The moment when a person who had decided what you were worth based on the roughness of your hands is confronted with the distance between what they assumed and what is true. Thomas continued without pause. Additionally, I wish to enter the following into the record regarding the property at Kensington Road. The land on which the residence sits, comprising approximately 1.3 acres in the Biltmore Forest neighborhood, is not owned by me or by my estate. This parcel was purchased by my father, Walter Grady, in 1996 for the sum of $42,000. My father has held this land continuously since that date. When my wife and I purchased the residence, my father leased the land to me for a nominal fee of $1 per year through a legal arrangement structured by his personal attorney. This lease is documented and enforceable. The land beneath our home belongs to my father. It has always belonged to my father. Meredith's grip on the table edge had tightened. The knuckles were white now. Not slightly white. The full white of a hand that is holding on to something because the alternative is to let go, and the body does not yet know what letting go will look like. Her other hand, the one in her lap, was not visible. But I could see the tension in her forearm. The particular rigidity of a muscle that is clenched around something it cannot name. Caroline had not moved. She was still looking at the table. But her stillness had changed. It was no longer the passive stillness of a witness. It was the active stillness of a person who is hearing something that confirms what she suspected and is processing the confirmation in real time. Judith's pencil was on the notepad now, resting. She was not writing. She was not looking at the notepad. She was looking at Meredith with the expression of a mother who is watching her daughter walk into something and cannot stop it. Thomas had not paused. He had not looked up. He was reading the document as written, in the measured tone of a man who has been instructed to present the full record and intends to do so regardless of the atmospheric conditions in the room. Furthermore, he read, I wish to ensure that the following information regarding my father's personal financial standing is formally entered into this proceeding, as I have reason to believe it may not be known to all parties, and may be relevant to how my father is treated in the period following my death. My father, Walter Allen Grady, has independently accumulated the following assets through his own labor, investment acumen, and financial discipline over a period of approximately 30 years. Thomas read each item with the same measured neutrality he had maintained throughout the proceedings. No inflection, no emphasis. The voice of a man who is reading a document and allowing the document to carry its own weight. A portfolio of 14 residential and commercial rental properties located throughout the Asheville metropolitan area, including parcels in West Asheville, Montford, Woodfin, Black Mountain, and Weaverville. The combined current market value of these properties, based on most recent county assessments and independent appraisals, is approximately $7,200,000. The room did not make a sound. Not a breath. Not a shift of weight in a chair. The specific silence of a space in which the air itself has stopped circulating because every person in it has forgotten to exhale. A residential property in Black Mountain, North Carolina, built by my father with his own hands, owned outright, with a current market value of approximately $280,000. Meredith had not blinked. I was watching her eyes, and they had not blinked since Thomas began reading the numbers. The human eye blinks approximately 15 times per minute under normal conditions. Meredith's eyes were open and fixed, and the lids were not moving because the information arriving through them had overridden the automatic functions. Personal investment accounts, currently valued at approximately $2,100,000. A construction equipment leasing operation comprising 4 pieces of heavy equipment leased to contractors in the western North Carolina region, with a current equipment value of approximately $850,000 and annual lease income of approximately $110,000. Liquid savings and cash accounts totaling approximately $620,000. Thomas paused. He looked up from the document. He looked at the room. Then he read the sentence that I will hear in my chest for the rest of my life. The total estimated net worth of my father, Walter Allen Grady, as of the time of this writing, is approximately $11,050,000. The silence that followed was not the silence of a room where people have nothing to say. It was the silence of a room where the air has been replaced with something heavier, something that has mass and pressure, something that sits on the shoulders and in the lungs and makes the simple act of breathing a conscious effort. $11 million. The carpenter from Black Mountain with the rough hands and the truck and the workshop. $11 million built one board at a time, one property at a time, one check written at a county office at a time, over 30 years. By a man who never once announced what he had, because what he had was never the point of who he was. Thomas looked down at the final paragraph. He read it. I include this information not to embarrass anyone, but to ensure that my father, who has never once in his life announced what he has, sought recognition for what he has given, or allowed anyone to misunderstand his position for his own advantage, is not misunderstood by anyone who might be inclined to do so after I am gone. My father built everything he has with the same hands my wife looked down on across her dinner table. He never corrected her. He never needed to. I am correcting the record now, because I will not be there to do it later. And because the man who taught me to build things deserves to have the truth built around him, where no one can tear it down. Thomas set the page down. The room was completely, entirely, perfectly still. I was not looking at Meredith when Thomas finished reading. I was looking at the page Thomas had set down, the page my son had written, the page that contained, in legal language, in the formal structure of a last will and testament, the most complete and devastating and loving thing anyone had ever said about me. He had measured me, the way I taught him, carefully, from every angle, checking the joints, testing the structure, and then he had built something around me that would stand after he was gone. I looked up. I looked across the table. Gina was staring at the table surface. Her arms were crossed tightly against her chest. No, not Gina. Caroline. Caroline Webb was staring at the table surface with her arms crossed, and her lips pressed together in the thin line of a woman who has just heard something that she suspected was true and is now processing the confirmed version. Judith's notepad was in her lap, the mechanical pencil beside it. She was not writing. She was not looking at the notepad. She was looking at a point on the wall behind Thomas's head, with the fixed expression of a woman whose calculations have been rendered irrelevant, and who has not yet determined what expression is appropriate for the revised circumstances. Richard, beside me, was doing the thing Richard does when he is professionally satisfied. Nothing visible. A slight increase in stillness. The stillness of a man who has spent 40 years watching documents do their work, and has occasionally had the privilege of witnessing one do exactly what it was designed to do at exactly the moment it was needed. And Meredith Hale Grady, who had handed me my bag at the door on the night of my son's funeral, who had said, "This is my house," who had come into this conference room on Patton Avenue with the settled certainty of a woman who understood the landscape and her position in it. Her face had gone the specific gray-white of a person whose blood pressure has done something sudden. The color that is not a color but an absence. The body pulling everything inward, because the exterior is no longer the priority. Her hands were still on the table edge, but they were not gripping anymore. They were resting there the way things rest, when the muscles that were holding them have stopped receiving instructions. Then she went sideways. Not dramatically. There was no backward toppling, no knocked chair, no theatrical collapse. She simply listed to the left, and Judith caught her with a startled sound, a sharp intake of breath. And Caroline was on her feet immediately, and Thomas Whitfield was already reaching for the phone on the conference table to call downstairs for assistance. Richard turned to me. He said nothing. He looked at me with the expression of a man who has been doing this for 40 years and has seen many things and has occasionally had the experience of watching a son protect his father from beyond the grave with nothing but the truth and bacca, a well-drafted document. I looked back at him. Neither of us said anything. "Daniel," I thought. "You thorough, careful, perceptive man. You saw it all coming. 6 months ago you called me and said nobody should ever look at your hands and think they know the whole story, and you meant this. You meant exactly this room and exactly this moment, and exactly the look on her face when the record was finally set. I should have asked you why you were thinking about it. But then, you always were better at the details than I was. You learned to measure twice, and then you measured 3 times, because you are your father's son. And your father's son does not leave anything unfinished." The medical responder who came up from the building's ground floor was a young man named Gutierrez, who had the efficient calm of someone who handles medical events in professional settings regularly and does not require context to do his job. He checked Meredith's pulse. He confirmed she was conscious. He asked her a set of standard orientation questions. "What is your name? What day is it? Where are you?" And determined within 5 minutes that what had occurred was a vasovagal syncope, a fainting episode brought on by acute stress, and not a medical emergency requiring transport. Meredith sat in her conference room chair with a glass of water that Thomas's assistant had brought in. She held the glass with both hands. Judith was beside her with a hand on her arm. The hand of a mother who is providing physical support while internally recalculating every number on the notepad that was now closed in her lap. Caroline stood slightly back, arms still crossed, with an expression I could not fully read. It was somewhere between discomfort and recognition, the face of a woman who had suspected something was off and has just learned that the something was considerably larger than she had imagined. Gutierrez packed his kit, confirmed Meredith was stable, and left. The room reassembled itself. Thomas looked around the table with the composure of a man who has just administered the most professionally unusual document of his recent career and intends to see the proceeding through to its conclusion regardless of what the room has done in the interim. "I have a few remaining administrative items to complete," he said. If everyone is ready to continue, Meredith said quietly. Yes. Continue. Her voice was different. The flatness was still there, but underneath it, something had shifted. The way a house sounds different after the frame has moved. The walls are still standing, but the angles are wrong, and every door that used to close cleanly now catches on the jamb. She held her water glass and looked at the table, and did not look at me. Thomas completed the administrative items. Executor confirmation. Estate tax timeline. The mechanics of transferring the named accounts. Straightforward. Thorough. Richard asked 3 questions about transfer timing, not because he did not know the answers, but because it was useful to have them stated on record in this room with these witnesses. When it was done, Thomas thanked everyone for their attendance, offered his condolences, and indicated his office would be in touch separately for next steps. Judith helped Meredith to her feet. Caroline gathered their things. A purse, the notepad, a coat that had been draped over a chair. They moved toward the door in the particular formation of people leaving a room where something has happened, and the leaving is itself a negotiation of who walks first and who holds the door, and how much space exists between bodies that have just shared an experience that none of them will describe the same way. At the door, Meredith stopped. She turned around. She looked at me across the length of the conference table, across the dark carpet and the professional quiet, and the distance that was both physical and considerably more than physical. I did not know, she said. I looked at her. I know you did not. Daniel never. No, I said. He did not. That was his choice. She looked at the table for a moment, then back at me. Her eyes were red, but she was not crying. She was past crying. She was in the territory that exists beyond crying, where the body has run out of that particular response and is left with the raw wiring of whatever comes next. Why did you never say anything? In 4 years, you came to dinners and holidays, and you sat at my table and you. She stopped. Started again. You were just there, with your hands and your truck and your workshop. Why did you never say anything? It was a genuine question. I heard that. Not a performance. Not positioning. A genuine, confused, the human question from a woman who was in the process of understanding that she had badly misread a situation for 4 years and had built an entire architecture of assumptions on a foundation that did not exist. I thought about how to answer. About all the true answers available. Because it was not relevant. Because Daniel knew. And that was enough. Because I do not measure myself by what I have. Because your opinion of my bank account was never something I needed. Because a carpenter learns early that the quality of the work does not depend on whether anyone is watching. What I said was, because Daniel asked me not to. And because what I have was never the point of who I am, Meredith. It still is not. The only person whose business it was is the one who made sure it was in the document. She looked at me. I could see her processing the sentence, turning it over, checking it for something she could argue with and not finding it because there was nothing in it that was untrue. Then she turned and walked out. Judith and Caroline followed. The conference room door closed with the soft click of professional hardware. Richard and I sat at the table. The room was quiet, in the specific way that rooms are quiet after something has left them. Not empty. Occupied by the residue of what had just happened, the way a workshop smells like sawdust even when no one is working. That was, Richard said, the most thorough act of love I have seen put into a legal document in 40 years of practice. I looked at the table. At the place where Thomas had set down the page my son had written. He was always thorough, I said. He learned it from a man who measures twice. And then he measured 3 times because he wanted to make sure the structure would hold after he was gone. We stood. We walked out of the conference room, down the hall, through the reception area, down the stairs. Outside on Patton Avenue, the Asheville afternoon was doing the thing Asheville does in October, a light rain that was barely rain. More a general dampness in the mountain air. The sky, the particular color of old pewter that is somehow not depressing but comfortable, like weather that has known you long enough to stop performing. Richard walked with me to the side street where Ray was parked. "What now?" he asked. "I am going back to Ray's. I will stay there another week or two. Then I will go home to Black Mountain. I have things to build." Richard put his hand briefly on my arm. A rare gesture from a man who expresses himself primarily through documents. "Daniel took care of you," he said. "I know," I said. "He learned it from watching me do it for 41 years. And then he did it better. Because he did it in writing. And writing holds." Ray was in the truck where I had left him. He was reading a paperback that he kept in the glove compartment for exactly these situations. The situations where you are waiting for someone you care about to come out of a room, and you do not know how long it will take, and you need something to do with your eyes that is not checking your phone, because Ray Perkins does not check his phone. He checks paperback westerns from the used bookstore on Marymount Avenue, and he has been reading the same Louis L'Amour novel for approximately 4 months, because he only reads it in waiting rooms and parking lots. I got in the truck. Ray closed the book. He did not ask how it went. He looked at my face, and he read what was there the way a man reads a face he has known for 40 years, quickly, accurately, and without requiring translation. He started the engine. We drove back to Weaverville. Donna's kitchen at 4:30 in the afternoon. She had been making chili since morning. The real kind. The kind that starts with dried chiles and onions, and takes 8 hours and fills a house with a smell that is so fundamentally about someone caring for you that it almost makes the day bearable. Donna makes chili the way she makes everything, with the quiet certainty of a woman who has decided that this is her contribution to whatever is happening, and she will deliver it on her own schedule regardless of external circumstances. Ray and I sat at the kitchen table. Donna set bowls in front of us without asking whether we wanted any, because the question was irrelevant. The chili was ready, and we were present, and those 2 facts were sufficient. I told Ray everything. Not the legal mechanics, the room, the way Thomas read the document, the way Meredith settled when the first items were read, and the way the settling reversed itself when the final section began. The numbers. The silence after the numbers. Daniel's words about my hands. "She fainted," I said. Ray's spoon stopped halfway to his mouth. He set it down. Before or after? During. Thomas was still reading the property list when the color left her face. He was on the construction equipment. I think. 850,000. She went sideways, and Judith caught her. Ray was quiet for a moment. The kitchen was warm. The chili smell was very present. The rain was doing its mountain thing against the window above the sink. The same window where I had stood at 5:30 that morning, holding coffee, and wondering if I was ready for a room I turned out to be more than ready for. "Daniel put it all in writing," Ray said. "Every nail. Every board." I looked at my friend across the kitchen table. "Every nail," I said. "Every board." He measured the whole structure, and he wrote it down so that nobody could come along afterward and say the building was not sound. Ray picked up his spoon. 8. I picked up mine. Donna sat down with her own bowl. The 3 of us ate chili in the Weaverville kitchen in the October afternoon, and the chili was good, and the rain was tapping the window, and the wood stove was ticking in the living room, and I was alive. And I had $11 million, and I had 2 good friends who had fed me and driven me places, and answered the phone at midnight, and never once asked me to explain myself because they had known me for 40 years, and 40 years is long enough to understand that some men carry things quietly. And the quiet is not emptiness. It is structure. He said he wanted to make sure nobody ever looked at my hands and thought they knew the whole story, I said. I set my spoon down. That is what he told me 6 months ago when he called about the will. He said, "Dad, I want to make sure nobody looks at your hands and thinks they know your whole story." And I said, "Daniel, nobody needs to know my story." And he said, "I need them to know. And now I understand why." Donna reached across the table and put her hand on mine. The nurse's hand. The hand that had held the hands of children in hospital rooms and the hands of parents in waiting rooms, and the hand of her own husband through 36 years of mornings and evenings, and the ordinary magnificent days in between. She did not say anything. She just put her hand on my rough carpenter's hand and held it there for a moment. And that was enough. The days that followed had a different quality. Not easier. Grief does not ease on a schedule, and Daniel's absence was more present now that the procedural business was concluded, and there was nothing left to attend to, except the fact of his being gone. But the days had ground under them again. Something had returned to the floor of things. The way a house feels different when the foundation has been inspected and confirmed, when you know the structure beneath you is sound, even if the rooms above are still being put in order. Richard called Monday morning. Everything was processing normally. Thomas Whitfield's office was handling the estate transfers. The land lease for Kensington Road remained in effect, a legal fact that Meredith's attorney would eventually need to address. But that was not Walter's concern to initiate. Richard's voice on the phone was the voice of a man who has done his job well and is content to let the documentation do the rest. I stayed at Ray and Donna's for 2 more weeks. Donna fed me. Ray and I watched the rest of the college football regular season. NC State lost to Clemson, which Ray mentioned exactly once, with the restraint of a man who understands that football rivalry has a time and place, and the second week after a funeral is the time, but not the place for excessive commentary. October 25th. A Saturday. I packed my bag in the guest room under the blue and white quilt. I put my father's watch in my pocket. I carried my bag to the front door. Ray was at the kitchen table with his coffee. Donna was at the stove making eggs. She knew I would not eat, but made anyway, because Donna Perkins does not negotiate with departure. "You need anything?" Ray said. "You call. Any hour." "I know," I said. Donna came from the kitchen. She stood in front of me and looked at me the way she had looked at me 2 weeks ago when she said, "You are going to be fine in there," with the steadiness of a woman who states facts rather than wishes. She put her arms around me. It was the first embrace I had received since the funeral that was not a handshake or a pat on the shoulder or the professional touch of an attorney's hand on my arm. It was a hug from a woman who had fed me for 2 weeks and never once told me it was going to be okay, because she was a nurse, and nurses do not promise outcomes they cannot guarantee. "Thank you, Donna," I said. "Drive safe," she said. "There is chili in your cooler." Of course there was. The drive from Weaverville to Black Mountain takes 22 minutes if you take Interstate 40 and 28 if you take the back road through the valley, which is the road I took because the back road follows the Swannanoa River, and the river was running clear in the late October afternoon, and I was in no particular hurry to arrive at a house that did not have anyone in it waiting for me. The cooler with Donna's chili was on the passenger seat. The Blue Ridge was ahead of me, the mountains I have looked at for 67 years, the mountains that were there before me and will be there after me, and do not care about wills or conference rooms or the specific net worth of the man driving toward them on a Saturday afternoon. I turned onto my road, pulled into the gravel drive. The house sat where it has sat since 1989. When I built it with lumber, I milled myself from trees. I cleared from this lot with a chainsaw I bought used from a man in Burnsville who was retiring from logging. A 1-story craftsman. Cedar siding. A porch that wraps around the south side. A workshop in the back that is larger than most people's living rooms. Because when I designed the property, I knew which building mattered more, and I was honest about it. Carl Hutchins was in his yard next door. Carl is 71. He has been my neighbor for 23 years. He is a retired mail carrier who has the specific quality of a man who spent 30 years delivering things to people's doors and has never fully stopped. He walked over when he saw my truck. "Walter, good to have you back. I am sorry about your son." "Thank you, Carl." He gestured at my yard. "I kept it up for you. Mowed twice. Raked the front." I looked at the yard. It was neat. The leaves had been raked into a pile near the tree line. The grass was cut short. "You did not need to do that, Carl. Helen would have killed me if I let that yard go," he said. And he was not wrong. Helen had opinions about yard maintenance that she expressed through a look she would give me from the porch when the grass exceeded a height she considered civilized. Carl had been on the receiving end of that look exactly once, in 2004. When he let his own yard go during a shoulder injury, and Helen had walked over with a casserole and a suggestion that had the structural weight of a directive. Carl never let his yard go again. I thanked Carl. He nodded and went back to his house. Carl Hutchins does not linger. He delivers what needs delivering, and he goes home. I have always appreciated that about him. I let myself into the house. The house that Helen loved. The house that I built for her and for Daniel, and for the life we were going to have in it, which turned out to be shorter than the house deserved but longer than some people get, and I have made my peace with that. Mostly, on the days when making peace is possible. The house smelled like itself. The particular accumulation of years and cedar and the specific wood of the floors that Helen had picked out. Red oak. Quarter sawn. She had seen it at a flooring showroom in Asheville, and she had put her hand on it and said, "This one, Walter. This is the one." And I had installed it myself. Every board. Every nail. On my hands and knees in this house for 3 weekends. While Daniel, then 4 years old, sat on the subfloor and watched me work with the same total concentration he had shown in the workshop doorway 3 years later when he asked to hold the hammer for the first time. I had never changed the floors. I never would. She chose them, and they were right. I set down my bag. I put the chili in the refrigerator. I stood in the entryway and let the house settle around me. The silence of a house you own. Not the silence of a hotel room or a guest room or a conference room. The silence of a place that belongs to you and that you belong to, where every wall was framed by your hands and every nail was driven by your hammer and the structure knows you the way you know it, intimately, from the bones out. Then I walked to the workshop. The workshop door has a latch I installed in 1990 that still works because I used marine-grade hardware, and I do not believe in replacing things that function. I opened it, and the smell hit me. Sawdust, cheddar, pine. The particular layered scent of a room where wood has been cut and shaped and sanded for 35 years, and the scent has soaked into the walls and the floor and the ceiling and the air itself. The smell of my hands. The smell of my life. The tools were where I had left them. The table saw. The jointer. The band saw. The hand tools on the pegboard wall that Helen had organized for me as a birthday gift in 2001. Each tool outlined in black marker so I would know where to put it back. I had not needed the outlines. I knew where everything went. But she had done it, and it made her happy. And I had never removed the outlines because they were hers. And on the workbench, where it has sat for as long as I can remember, my father's hand plane. A Stanley Bailey No. 5, manufactured in 1951. My father used it. His father used it before him. 3 generations of hands on the same wooden handle, the wood darkened and smooth from decades of grip, the blade still sharp because I sharpen it every spring, whether I use it or not, because a tool that is not maintained is a tool that has been abandoned, and I do not abandon things. I picked it up. The weight of it. The familiar balance. The handle worn to the exact shape of hands that came before mine. 3 generations, I thought. 3 generations of men who built things, who looked at raw material and saw what it could become, who worked with their hands and did not apologize for the calluses. I set the plane down. I looked around the workshop, at the sawdust on the floor, at the piece of red oak still on the workbench, the piece I had been shaping when the phone rang 3 weeks ago with the news that ended one life and rearranged another. Okay, I thought. Here you are, Walter. 67 years old. A house you built with your own hands. A life you built the same way. A portfolio of 14 properties that you bought one at a time, with money you earned one board at a time. A lawyer who read a document your son wrote to protect you. 2 friends who made chili and drove you places and held your hand across a kitchen table. And a boy who loved you in the most thorough, careful, documented way a person can be loved. It is enough. It is more than enough. Now get to work. The phone rang. I pulled it from my pocket. The screen said Kevin Marsh. Mr. Grady? I hope I am not. Is this an okay time? There was something Daniel told me, maybe 5 months ago. I do not know if you would want to hear it. Tell me. I said. We were at lunch. Kevin said. Just regular lunch. Tuesday, I think. The place on Lexington Avenue with the sandwiches. Daniel had the turkey club. He always had the turkey club. I used to tell him they had other things on the menu and he would say, Kevin, when you find the thing that works, you do not fix it. Kevin's voice had the careful cadence of a man who is handling something fragile and wants to make sure he sets it down in the right place. He had waited 5 weeks to make this call. I understood that. Some things need time between the knowing and the telling. A good carpenter does not rush the finished work. He brought up his dad out of nowhere. Kevin said, We were not talking about anything related. I think we had been talking about a project, the Henderson renovation over on Town Mountain Road, something about the foundation specs. And Daniel just stopped and said, Kevin, my dad can look at a piece of wood and see the house it wants to be. Kevin paused. I stood in my workshop with the phone pressed to my ear and the sawdust smell around me and the Stanley Bailey hand plane on the workbench 3 feet away, and I listened. He said, My dad can look at a piece of land and see what it is worth in 20 years. Not what it is worth now. What it is going to be worth when everyone else figures out what he already knew. He said, He taught me everything about building. Everything. The only difference is he uses wood and I use blueprints. But it is the same thing. It is looking at raw material and seeing what it can become, and then having the patience to build it right. Kevin stopped again. I could hear him breathing. The particular breathing of a man who is in the middle of delivering something important and wants to get it right because getting things right was what Daniel valued, and Kevin is honoring that. Then he said, I'm still trying to be as good at it as he is. The workshop was very quiet. The October afternoon outside, the last of the light coming through the west window and landing on the workbench where the piece of red oak sat unfinished. He said it like it was the most important project he was working on, Kevin said. Like you were the model he was trying to match. Not a building, not a design. You. The way you do things, the way you build things, the way you carry yourself. He said his father never once made anyone feel small about what they did not have. He said that was the hardest thing to learn, not the building. The building he understood. It was the humility he was still working on. Thank you for telling me that, Kevin. I said. I managed the sentence. I am not sure how. There are moments when words come out of your mouth through some mechanical process that has nothing to do with your current capacity for speech. And the words are steady because they have to be, not because you are. I thought you would want to know, Kevin said. He talked about you a lot, Mr. Grady. Not in a showy way. In the way people talk about things they are proud of when they think no one is keeping track. He was proud of you. Proud of what you built. Proud of who you are. Call me Walter. I said, Walter. A pause. If you ever need anything. If there is ever a project or just, I do not know. If you ever want to get lunch and talk about him, I would like that. I would like that too, Kevin. Thank you. We talked for 20 more minutes about Daniel. About the work Daniel loved. About the Henderson renovation. And the way Daniel had spent 3 extra days on the foundation specs because he said a building is only as honest as the part nobody sees, which was something I had told him when he was 12 years old on Carl Renfro's roof, and which he had apparently carried with him for 29 years and turned into a professional philosophy. Kevin told me about Daniel's desk at the firm, which was organized with the precision of a man who believed that the arrangement of your workspace reflected the arrangement of your thinking. Kevin told me about the way Daniel brought the same thoroughness to personal relationships that he brought to buildings, checking in on people, following up, remembering details that other people forgot, building in redundancy for the things that mattered. The will. The final section. 6 months before he died, he was already building redundancy for me. He was already reinforcing the structure. He looked at the future, and he saw a foundation that might not hold. And he did what I taught him to do. He tested the boards. He found the ones that were rotten, and he built something stronger around the thing he wanted to protect. After we hung up, I sat in my workshop for a long time. The afternoon had gone gold through the west window. The sawdust floated in the light the way it does, slow and suspended, the particular lazy drift of particles that are in no hurry because they have nowhere to be except exactly where they are. I picked up the Stanley Bailey, my father's hand plane, my grandfather's hand plane, the wooden handle that 3 generations of Grady men had held while they shaped raw material into something useful. I knew it, Daniel, I thought. I always knew it. I knew it when you were 7, and you said my hands smell like yours now. I knew it when you were 12, and you asked if rotten boards were true for people too. I knew it when you were 22, and you called at midnight because you got the job. I knew it when you were 36, and you sat on my porch and said everything I build I learned from watching your hands. I knew you saw me. I knew you understood what I was building and why I was building it, and that the building was never about the money, it was about the making. It was about the taking of raw material and turning it into something that holds. But thank you for putting it in writing. Thank you for measuring twice, and then measuring 3 times, and then handing the measurements to a lawyer and saying, "Make this hold." Because it holds, Daniel. It holds. I set the plane down. I looked at the workshop, at the tools on the pegboard, at Helen's black marker outlines, at the red oak waiting on the bench, at the sawdust on the floor that smelled like 40 years and 3 generations, and the particular patience of men who build things, because building things is what they were put here to do. December came to Black Mountain the way it always does. Quietly, with frost on the workshop windows and the Blue Ridge disappearing into low gray cloud and the particular stillness of a mountain town settling into the season that requires the most patience and rewards it with the least. Meredith called on December 14th. Once, I was in the workshop, which is where I had been spending most of my days since returning to Black Mountain. Not because there was urgent work to be done, but because the workshop is where I think best and I had thinking to do. The piece of red oak was becoming a bookcase again. I had remembered what it was for, I answered. Her voice was different from every previous version of her voice I had heard. The management was gone. The flatness was gone. What was there instead was something quieter and more honest, something that had been through something and had come out the other side without the armor. Walter, I wanted to say something. I should have said it before, but I was not in a place to say it before. I waited. I set down the hand plane, and I stood in my workshop among the sawdust and the tools. And I waited. What I did the night of the funeral was wrong. You can tell me it is fine, or you can tell me you understand, but I want to say it directly first, because you deserve that. It was wrong, and it was cruel. And I have spent 2 months thinking about the fact that Daniel knew me well enough to write what he wrote in that document. That is something I have to live with, Walter. That my husband looked at me and saw what I was going to do before I did it, and he built a wall around his father because he knew his wife would need one there. I sat with that. The workshop was cold. December in the mountains. The wood stove in the house was going, but the workshop has no heat except what the work generates. And I had stopped working. Meredith, I said. Daniel loved you. He chose you. He built a life with you in a house that I helped build on land that I own, and he was happy in that life. That matters to me, because it mattered to him. A pause. The sound of a woman breathing on the other end of a phone line, trying to hold something together. What you did was wrong, I said. I am not going to tell you it was fine. But I am also not going to carry it past the point where carrying it serves anything. I have spent my whole life building things, Meredith. I do not have the years left to spend them tearing things down. Not even things that deserve it. Thank you, she said. Very quiet. I want one thing, I said. Bring the kids to Black Mountain sometimes. Let them see the workshop. Let them smell the sawdust. Let them hold a hammer if they want to hold a hammer. Daniel learned to build by watching my hands. I would like his children to have that chance. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I will. I will bring them. Good, I said. Take care of yourself, Meredith. We hung up. I stood in the workshop for a moment. Then I picked up the phone and called Ray. How is Black Mountain? He asked. Cold, I said. Good. Cold is honest. You know where you stand with cold. I settled into the conversation the way you settle into a chair that fits. You and Donna want to come for dinner this weekend? I will cook. Sandra is already planning what to bring. He paused. I mean Donna. Donna is already planning what to bring. Of course she is. Walter. His voice had the warmth in it that Ray saves for when he means something and wants you to know he means it without making a production of it. Daniel was a good man. Yeah, I said. He really was. Gets that from somewhere. A sound that was almost a laugh. Almost. The kind of sound that happens between two men who have known each other for 40 years and have been through enough together that the almost is worth more than the whole thing would be from anyone else. We hung up. I walked from the workshop to the house. Through the back door. Past the kitchen where Helen's table still sat and where Daniel's check for $85,000 had been written on a Sunday afternoon that felt like 100 years ago and yesterday at the same time. Through the living room with the red oak floors that Helen chose and that I installed on my hands and knees while a 4-year-old boy watched from the subfloor with the concentration of someone memorizing a future. I stepped out onto the porch. December morning. The Blue Ridge was wrapped in fog, the mountains showing and hiding themselves the way they do in winter, like God was deciding how much of the view to reveal and had settled on just enough to remind you it was there. The air was cold and clean in the way that mountain air is clean, the kind of cold that enters your lungs and makes you aware that you are breathing, and that breathing is not nothing, it is something, it is the fundamental thing. I sat in Helen's chair. The chair she had claimed the first morning we lived in this house, the one on the south side of the porch, where the sun hits first. I held my coffee. I looked at the mountains. I looked at my hands. 67 years of hands. Sawdust and wood stain, and the particular roughness of a man who built things. These hands built a house and a life, and raised a son, and buried a wife, and buried that son, and held together in a conference room, while a lawyer read the most loving document I will ever hear. These hands were looked down upon by a woman who thought she knew what they were worth. These hands were written about by a man who knew exactly what they were worth, and put it in writing so the record could never be torn down. There is a thing I have learned in 67 years of building. The work you do with your hands is only as good as the love you put behind it. A house built without love is just lumber and nails. A life built without love is just time passing. But a house built with love, and Lord knows I have tried. A house built with love stands through the storms, and a son raised with love. Lord knows I tried to do that too. A son raised with love builds things you never could have built yourself, things you did not know you needed, things that hold after he is gone. I do not know what God's plan was when he took Daniel from me. I do not know why a man that good and that young and that thorough in his love was given a defect in his brain that no one knew about until it was too late. But I know this. The Lord gives us hands and he gives us time, and he gives us the people we love, and what we build with those three things is the only testament that matters. Daniel built his testament in a legal document. I built mine in wood and land, and a life that I am still living. It was enough. It was everything. And the boy who learned to build from watching my hands had built the one thing I could not build for myself, a record that no one could tear down. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of someone who built things quietly, someone who loved without announcing it, someone whose hands told a story that words never could, then I hope you will share it. Leave a thought in the comments. Tell me about the builder in your life. And if you have not already, subscribe to this channel so you do not miss the next story. Because there are more stories like this one, stories about people who carry heavy things and build good things and love in ways that outlast them. Thank you for listening. Now go call someone who matters.